And Ivan from New York. What happened between Bill Watts and Hank Aaron? Well, nothing really happened between them. What happened is this is quite the story. So what happened is that Bill Watts had been hired by WCW in 1992. You hear a lot about Mid-South wrestling back in the 80s and how successful it was, and it was. Bill Watts was a very successful wrestler, and he was a very successful wrestling promoter. And I'm sure that's why WCW at that time felt that this was a good move on their part to bring in Cowboy Bill Watts, and they did in 1992. And they brought him in also in part because they had to cut costs across the organization. I guess they were bleeding money, they had to cut costs, and so they brought in Bill Watts to run the promotion. And he was also very friendly with the Observer. He was very friendly towards the Torch at that time. And he did an interview with Wade Keller in 1991 that I guess flew under the radar of a lot of the higher-ups at Turner when he was hired, because if they had known that he made comments or the comments that he did in this interview, I don't think they would have hired him. They talked wrestling, a lot of wrestling talk in the interview, obviously. But then at the very end of this very long interview, the discussion, and I don't remember how it happened, if Wade started asking other questions or if Watts just started veering off into other social topics, or how they ended up on these subjects. But at the end of the interview, they shifted to discuss his political views and his social views. And things took a very bad turn. I cannot repeat everything that he said. So I went back to reread the exact comments. I can't repeat everything that the man said. But basically, yeah, he was saying, for example, if you own a business, then you should be allowed to discriminate. He said that's why he went into business. He went into business so that he could discriminate. And then he went off on gays. He was throwing slurs around left and right. And why should I have to hire one? They discriminate against us. We should be allowed to do the same thing to them. I have no idea what he was even talking about. And then he went off, after that he went off on, as he called them, the blacks. Now, consider this. Consider that this is a man who is known in Mid-South for pushing stars like Junkyard Dog before he was ever a star in WWE. Junkyard Dog was a huge star in Mid-South and could have gone on to be even bigger than he was, but he had drug problems. He had a lot of problems of his own making, and his star burned out relatively quickly after that. That was nobody's fault but his own. But he pushed the Junkyard Dog as a major star. He gave the book to Ernie Ladd. He considered Ernie Ladd one of his best friends. In WCW, he put the world title on Ron Simmons. That was his decision. That came during his tenure in WCW. That great dramatic world title win where he pins Vader and everybody in the crowd is going crazy. And Ron Simmons is the first African-American world champion. It was such a big deal. That came under Cowboy Bill Watts. So, yes, he does have a history of being very favorable to black stars, more than a lot of other promoters did at that time. But he was a businessman. Above and beyond anything else, first and foremost, he was a businessman. And so I think if he thought he could make money off of you or with you, then green was more important to him than black or white. The comments he made here, if you read the whole thing, the comments he made were repulsive. He went off on the TV series Roots and what a fraud it was, and he made a comment, you know, if I don't want to sell fried chicken to blacks, I shouldn't have to. It's my restaurant. Anyway, Bill Watts had a lot of repulsive comments in that interview. And it was one of the reasons that Paul Heyman sued WCW and won. If he won or if there was a settlement or what the situation was. He won a lot of money He won a lot of money, I know that, because he said that Bill Watts would routinely, and at least once this happened in front of a locker room full of people, so it's not just he said, she said. There were other witnesses to this, but he would make comments about Heyman being Jewish, and he would make comments about women, derogatory comments about women, and after he was fired from the company, Heyman sued for wrongful termination, and I think it was either workplace discrimination or ethnic discrimination that he also sued for. Probably a bad idea to even get into this kind of thing with Heyman. His father was a lawyer. I don't quite think WCW knew the tree they were barking up when that happened. But Heyman still says he's not even really allowed to talk about it, even to this day. So we don't have the details on how much he won or anything like that. I guess there must be some confidentiality clause. But what happened with Hank Aaron, to get back to your original question, this all ties together. What happened with Hank Aaron is one of the greatest, for those who don't know, one of the greatest baseball players, legends, to ever play the game. Played for the Braves, still to this day works as an executive for the team. He's been part of the whole Atlanta family there now for decades. I don't know how much he's actually doing these days. He's 86 years old at this point. But he was working for Turner and had his own office there and everything. And there was a WCW show where he made an appearance. And I don't know what show this was. I don't know if it was just, hey, here's Hank Aaron, and he waved. But you can find pictures online of him in the ring being interviewed, and there's Bill Watts. Bill Watts is in the ring as well. They're all smiles. And Mark Madden at the time, you may know that name. Mark Madden has been a writer for a number of years, and he was working for WCW. In the later years, he was doing commentary for WCW. Mark Madden at the time, not only was he writing for, I think, one of the Philadelphia newspapers, but he was also a writer and a columnist for The Torch. He was working for Wade Keller and The Torch, which is where Bill Watts had given that interview that I just talked about. And so he knew what Watts said, and when he saw Hank Aaron standing with a smile on his face, shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the ring with Bill Watts, he was appalled. And so what did Mark Madden do? Mark Madden faxed a copy of the interview with Bill Watts. He faxed a copy of the interview to Hank Aaron. And when Hank Aaron read those comments that Watts had made, he was rightfully appalled. He didn't even know who Bill Watts was. He didn't know who Bill Watts was. He didn't know that he was working for WCW. He wasn't a fan. He didn't know. I'm sure the day that he was in the ring for WCW, he's probably looking around going, I don't know who these fucking people are. I was just told to be here. But he was appalled by what he read. And he said, look, if this guy works for Turner, then something will be done about it. And the very next day, Bill Watts was gone from WCW. Now, he may have resigned. He may have been fired. I think he claims that he quit. Maybe it's the old, you can't fire me, I quit thing. Depends who you believe. But, hey, look, maybe he did. Maybe he did quit on his own. Maybe they met with him about it. They had a meeting. And maybe they wanted him to apologize. And can you picture Bill Watts being the kind of person to go out there and say, oh, I'm sorry? Probably not. So I could easily see a situation where they called him into a meeting and said, you have to do this, you have to say that. And basically he was like, fuck you, I quit. Maybe that's what happened. But that was the end of Bill Watts in WCW. No one will ever dispute his success as a wrestler. Nobody will ever dispute his success as a promoter. And his 1 year in WCW gave Ron Simmons his one and only world title. Some great matches that year in 1992 with Sting and Vader. The Dangerous Alliance. There was a lot of good stuff that year in WCW. The top rope disqualification rule, that wasn't so good. Him wanting to make wrestling more realistic by having all the mats removed from around the ring. Those silly little things that help cushion the blow when you get slammed on the floor, for the safety and welfare of the performers. Yeah, let's get rid of those. But it wasn't a bad year for WCW. At least in terms, creatively. Business-wise, maybe it wasn't. I don't have all the numbers in front of me It's not like WCW was lighting the world on fire in 1992, but then again, neither was WWE. Business-wise, that was a pretty terrible year for them too. But it was negligence on WCW's part even hiring him in the first place after he had made those comments. I mean, just from a business point of view, the comments he made, if your choice is to discriminate against an entire group of people, you know what that makes you? That makes you a really shitty business person. That's what it makes you. A smart person would want to serve as many customers as they can. Not a very bright thing for him to say. And yet, that did not stop Vince McMahon from hiring Bill Watts 2 years later to a position of power in WWE. And that didn't last very long either.